Imagine, police officers break into a house, and what they see makes even seasoned detectives turn away. In the bedroom, a woman lies on the bed, covered with a silk blanket. Her hair is neatly styled, red lipstick is on her lips, and rings are on her fingers. A man stands next to them and begs them not to take his bride. But there is one detail that makes the blood run cold. This woman died 7 years ago. This is not the plot of a horror movie. This is a true story that happened in a small seaside town. A story about love, madness, and obsession that has crossed all boundaries of human morality. Watch to the end, because the ending of this story will shock you. Viktor Messing was never an ordinary person. From childhood, he lived in a world of his own fantasies, where reality intertwined with dreams so tightly that sometimes he himself could not distinguish one from the other. His mother, a stern woman with cold eyes, often told him he was not of this world. His father left the family when Viktor was 5, leaving behind only an old camera and the smell of tobacco that lingered in the hallway of their small apartment for a long time. By 30, Viktor had become a doctor, not a surgeon or general practitioner. He chose a profession that allowed him to see through the human body, literally. A radiologist, a man who looks through flesh and bones, sees what is hidden from ordinary eyes. There was something mystical about this profession, something that perfectly suited his strange nature. Colleagues considered him withdrawn but competent. Nurses whispered behind his back, calling him the oddball and the ghost. He arrived at work before everyone else and left after everyone else, as if he had no life beyond the hospital walls. And they were right. Viktor truly had no life. There was only work, an empty apartment, and strange dreams in which a woman with an angel's face came to him. He had been seeing this woman in his dreams since youth. She had dark hair falling on her shoulders like a waterfall of silk, enormous brown eyes, and a smile that made his heart beat so hard he would wake up in the middle of the night, gasping from an inexplicable sense of loss. He searched for her everywhere, in the faces of passers-by, on magazine pages, in frames of old films. But she existed only in his dreams. This continued for 20 years. 20 years of lonely waiting that seemed to him not a curse but a promise. He believed with fanatical conviction that someday fate would bring them together, that the woman from his dreams was real and somewhere waiting for him. And then, on an April morning in 1930, she walked into his office. Her name was Elena Ortega. She was 22 years old, an age when life is just beginning, when ahead lies an eternity of possibilities and hopes. She came for an examination accompanied by her mother, a small woman with frightened eyes who did not let go of her daughter's hand for a second. Viktor remembered every detail of that first meeting, the creak of the door, the rays of spring sun falling through the window, the scent of her perfume, something floral, delicate, almost childlike, and her face. God, her face. It was her, the woman from his dreams. Every feature matched perfectly. The shape of her eyes, the curve of her lips, the dimples on her cheeks that appeared when she smiled shyly. Viktor felt the floor give way beneath him. He had to grab the edge of the table to keep from falling. "Doctor, are you all right?" she asked, and her voice was exactly as he had heard it hundreds of times in his dreams. Melodic, slightly husky, with a light accent. Yes, yes, everything is fine, he mumbled, though nothing was fine. His entire world had just turned upside down. Elena was ill. Tuberculosis, a disease that in those times sounded like a death sentence. Her lungs on the X-ray looked like a map of a destroyed city, riddled with dark spots and shadows. Viktor looked at these images for hours, holding them against the light, and each time his heart broke from pain and a strange, almost religious reverence. He swore to save her. This became his mission, his reason for existence. He studied the latest medical journals, ordered experimental drugs from Europe, worked on creating his own treatment methods. Colleagues tapped their temples, since when does a radiologist treat patients? But Viktor did not care. Elena came for procedures 3 times a week. Viktor lived from meeting to meeting. He gathered information about her bit by bit. She loved to dance, adored Carlos Gardel's music, dreamed of someday seeing Paris. She was engaged to a young man named Luis, a soldier who served somewhere on the border. Luis. How Viktor hated that name. How he hated the thought that some rough soldier touched her hand, kissed her lips, saw her smile every day. This was wrong. Elena belonged to him. He knew this with absolute certainty. Fate had destined her for him. Were the dreams not proof? He began bringing her gifts. At first modest flowers, fruits, books. Elena accepted them with polite gratitude, not suspecting what feelings raged in her doctor's soul. Then the gifts became more expensive jewelry, silk scarves, perfumes from Paris. Her mother looked at Viktor with suspicion, but Elena, kind and naive Elena, believed that the doctor was simply a very responsive person. "You are so kind to me, Dr. Messing," she would say, and her smile was like the sun after a long rain. And Viktor would smile in return, and no one saw what madness splashed in the depths of his eyes. By autumn, Elena's condition had sharply deteriorated. All of Viktor's experimental methods proved powerless against the disease that was devouring her from within. He sat by her bedside for hours. The relatives had long accepted his presence, taking him for a devoted doctor. The engagement to Luis was broken off. The soldier wrote a letter explaining that he could not marry a sick girl. He needed a healthy wife who would bear him children. Elena cried for 3 days, and Viktor gloated, though he hid it behind a mask of sympathy. "He did not deserve you," he whispered, holding her hand. "No one deserves you. You are perfection." In the last weeks of her life, Elena barely got out of bed. Her once lush hair had thinned, her skin had become translucent, and her eyes enormous, as if they had absorbed all the beauty that had left the rest of her body. Viktor came every evening. He read her poetry, sang songs, told stories about distant countries she would never see. "When I die," she said one day, and her voice was weak as the rustle of autumn leaves, "don't forget about me, doctor." "Never," he replied, and this was the most honest promise of his life. Elena Ortega died on October 25th at 2 a.m. Her mother found her in the morning cold, motionless, with a strange half-smile on her lips. On the knit-stand lay a bouquet of white roses and a note, "To my angel, forever yours, V. Mum." Viktor paid for the funeral. He insisted on buying the most expensive coffin made of mahogany, lined with white silk. He ordered a crypt in the cemetery with a marble angel on the roof. He escorted the coffin to the grave, and his sobs were so loud that even the relatives looked at him with surprise. But these were not sobs of grief. This was weeping of relief. because Elena's death, as monstrous as it sounds, was not the end for Viktor, but the beginning. That same night, when the cemetery emptied, Viktor returned with a shovel and tools. The first weeks after Elena's return were the most difficult. Viktor brought the body to his house under cover of night, wrapped in sheets. His heart pounded so hard that he feared the neighbors would hear it. But no one saw him carrying the long bundle through the back door. No one asked questions. The body had already begun to decompose. The smell was unbearable sweet, nauseating, penetrating every crack. But Viktor did not retreat. He used all his medical knowledge to stop the decay process. Formaldehyde, wax, aromatic oils, he tried everything. He replaced the eyes with glass ones, stuffed the body with rags and cotton, covered the skin with layers of wax and plaster. The work took months. Every evening after his shift at the hospital, Viktor returned home and continued his gruesome task. He did not regard this as necrophilia or madness, no. In his understanding, he was simply correcting injustice. Death had taken Elena too early. He was fixing fate's mistake. When the work was finished, Viktor stepped back and looked at his creation. Before him on the bed lay a woman. Yes, she was motionless, yes. Her skin had a strange waxy tint, but in the dim lamplight she seemed merely asleep. He dressed her in a white dress that he had bought specially for this occasion. He put a ring on her finger, the same one he had intended to give her during her lifetime, but never dared. "Now you're mine," he whispered, touching her cold cheek. "Now nothing will separate us." Thus began their family life. Every morning Viktor woke up next to her. He wished her good morning, told her about his plans for the day. Before leaving for work, he kissed her forehead and promised to return early. In the evening, he cooked dinner for two, placed a plate in front of her, and made small talk as if she could respond. He turned on the radio and invited her to dance. He held her in his arms, twirled around the room to the sounds of tango, and in these moments his face glowed with such happiness as he had never experienced in life. On weekends, he wheeled her around the garden behind the house in a wheelchair. A high fence hid them from curious eyes. He arranged picnics for her, spread a blanket, set out a basket with fruits and wine, read her favorite books aloud. Neighbors noticed that Viktor had become strange. He almost stopped leaving the house, avoided any communication. At the store, he bought food and cleaning supplies in huge quantities. Sometimes at night, music came from his household tangos, the same melodies over and over again. Eccentric, the neighbors said. Recluse. No one suspected the truth. A year passed this way. Then another. Elena's body continued to deteriorate despite all of Viktor's efforts. He replaced parts, restored, repaired his bride, became more and more like a doll, but to him she remained perfect. He did not see the sunken cheeks and empty eye sockets. He saw only the woman of his dreams. 7 years. For 7 years, Viktor lived in this nightmare, sincerely believing it to be paradise. Florentina Ortega, Elena's younger sister, grew up with the shadow of her dead sister over her head. She was 14 when Elena died, and she remembered the strange doctor who was always hovering nearby, giving gifts and looking at her sister with a gaze that made her uneasy. Years passed, and the family gradually recovered from the loss. But Florentina could not forget one strange incident. A few months after the funeral, she came to the cemetery and noticed that the marble angel on her sister's crypt was turned in a different direction. and also that the lock on the crypt door looked new. She told her mother, but she just waved it off. "You imagined it. Don't make things up." But Florentina had not imagined it, and she remembered. 7 years passed. Florentina turned 21, the same age Elena had been at her first meeting with Dr. Messing. One day she accidentally saw him on the street, aged, hunched, with a mad gleam in his eyes. He was carrying a large box and looking around like a thief. Something clicked in her head. All the oddities, all the inconsistencies she had noticed over the years suddenly came together into one horrifying picture. That same night, Florentina snuck into the cemetery. With difficulty opening the crypt door, she looked inside, and the world collapsed. The coffin was empty. The next morning, police stood on the doorstep of Viktor Messing's house. When detectives entered, they saw a scene they would remember for the rest of their lives. The entire house had been turned into a temple of obsession. Hundreds of photographs of Elena hung on the walls, alive and dead. Her things, dresses, jewelry, combs, were neatly arranged on shelves like museum exhibits. The air was saturated with a mixture of perfumes, incense, and something else, something rotten, that no fragrance could mask. And in the bedroom, on a canopied bed, she lay. What remained of Elena Ortega after 7 years of Victor's care? This was no longer a woman or even a body. It was a construction. A wire frame stuffed with rags, a mask of wax and plaster, a wig made from Elena's hair, which Victor had cut while she was still alive. Glass eyes carefully inserted into empty sockets, a ball gown adorned with lace, and the smell, unbearable, sweet smell of decay that no preservative could completely mask. Victor stood nearby and wept. He'd begged the police not to take his bride. He swore they loved each other, that she herself wanted to be with him. Had she not told him before death that she wanted to stay by his side? "We were going to get married," he repeated. "Please don't separate us." The detectives exchanged glances. They had seen a lot in their work, but they had never encountered anything like this. Viktor Messing was arrested, but the trial turned into a circus. Newspapers were torn between disgust and strange admiration. Headlines screamed, "Love stronger than death?" and "Madman or romantic?" And here is what is striking. A significant portion of the public sympathized with Victor. Women sent him flowers in prison. Letters of support arrived by the hundreds. People saw in him not a monster but a tragic hero, a man whose love was so strong that it crossed the boundary between life and death. This was a phenomenon that psychologists study to this day. How could society romanticize necrophilia? How could people ignore that Victor had essentially desecrated the body of a dead girl, stolen it from her family, deprived her of a dignified rest? The answer perhaps lies in the power of narrative. Victor told his story as a love story, and people believed. They did not want to see the pathological obsession, the selfishness, the objectification. They wanted to see a fairy tale. The court, however, faced an unexpected legal problem. According to the laws of that time, grave desecration had a statute of limitations. 7 years had passed, the crime had formally expired. As for keeping human remains, the laws were so vague that the lawyers themselves got confused. Victor was found insane. He was sent to a psychiatric hospital where he spent the next 20 years. But even there, he did not abandon his love. He continued to talk about Elena, drew her portraits, wrote letters to her that there was no one to send. The body of Elena, what remained of it, was finally buried. This time the family made sure the burial place remained secret. No crypts, no marble angels. Just an unmarked grave somewhere on the outskirts of the city. Florentina never recovered. For the rest of her life, she struggled with nightmares in which she saw her sister not alive and healthy, but as she had found her in Victor's house. The wax face, the glass eyes, the smile painted on. Viktor Messing died at 73 in a small apartment on the outskirts of town. Neighbors called the police when they noticed a strange smell and irony of fate that is hard to miss. When the police entered the apartment, they found the old man in an armchair. He had been dead for several days, but that was not what made them freeze. In the corner of the room, on a special pedestal, stood a figure, a life-size mannequin dressed in a white wedding gown. The face was made with remarkable skill. Victor had clearly spent years perfecting his craft, and this face, it was Elena's face, as he remembered her before the illness, young, radiant, perfect. Next to the mannequin lay an album, page after page drawings, poems, notes, 20 years of diaries in which Victor continued his dialogue with Elena. He described their travels, their conversations, their plans for the future. He lived in a parallel reality until the very end. On the last page was written, "My dear Elena, today I will finally come to you. Wait for me there where there are no diseases, no death, no separation. Forever yours, Victor."